Alhamdulillah. First of all, I would just like to say that Allah is the best of planners. I was actually not coming here, and I guess there was some confusion about being, I don't know who put the name on there, but it was just a miscommunication. I had another meeting somewhere else, and I couldn't make it, and then we went to visit a Sheikh from the Emirates who just finished a book by Sheikh al-Haddad, and he gave me a copy of the book, and I wanted to give a copy to Habib Ali al-Jifri and also to say salam to him because I'm leaving tomorrow. So I just asked somebody, how far is Saaus? And they said it's right around the corner. So I said, well, I guess we'll just stop by there. And then we went to Saaus, and this whole group of students were coming in out of a class, and they said, oh, we thought we were going to miss your lecture. I said, what lecture?
This one.
And then they showed me my name was on the thing, so we canceled the other appointment. I'd like to introduce Habib Ali al-Jifri. He's somebody that I've had the pleasure and honor of knowing for several years. We also have a relationship from wet nursing, so and that's one of the blessings of Islam, is that it unites people through blood marriage and through wet nursing. He comes from a clan in the Yemen known as the Ba'alawi clan, and these are people who are direct descendants of the Prophet ﷺ through Fatima and Ali, and they fled the persecution of the family in Iraq very early on, and were aided by the Yemeni people, and have over the last 1,200 years really been the source of a lot of spiritual and intellectual sustenance for the people of Yemen, particularly the valley of Hadramaut. And knowledge is known to be both acquired, and there are two types of knowledge. There's what they call kasbi and wahbi. Kasbi knowledge is what we earn through our efforts, and wahbi knowledge is what is given from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so knowledge is of two types, and some of the ulama are gifted in having one, which is the kasab, but not the wahab. And others are gifted in having the wahab, but not the kasab. And then some have the wahab and the kasab together, which is quite unusual. And I'll just give you one example. There's a famous scholar from Fez, Morocco, Sidi Abdul Aziz al-Dabbagh, and he was completely illiterate, and he was able to interpret incredibly difficult hadiths and verses of the Quran, and the scholars of his age recognized his knowledge. And one scholar once said to him, al-ulama warathatul anbiya, mada warithta min rasulillah. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. What did you inherit from him? And he said, warithtu minhu ummiyatahu. I have inherited his illiteracy. And this is an indication, because the mu'jiza of prophets can also be the karamat of the awliya, except for wahi. So anything that a prophet does as a mu'jiza can be done as a karama, and we believe wathbitan al-awliya al-karama wa man nafaha fambidan karama, like Imam al-Daqqani says in the Jawhara. Confirm the karamat of the awliya, and whoever denies them, deny him. So he is, I believe, a very inspired and intuitive teacher. He's had good teachers as well in the Kasbi area, but Allah has given him many insights in our estimation. And he has a great deal to teach us. The thing that I find most profound about not only Habib Ali, but about generally the Ba'alawi clan, and particularly the scholars from among them, and one of my own teachers, Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad, may Allah have mercy on him and pleasure, give him his pleasure. He was one of the great illuminated people that I met in my life. And when I met him, I got a glimpse of what it meant to be a Hujjat al-Islam. Because the real proof of Islam has never been in our books, but it's been in the people that this ummah has produced. And the Prophet ﷺ, his proof is not just the Quran, but it's actually his Sahaba. They are the Hujjah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, حَسْبُكَ اللَّهُ وَمِنِ اتَّبَعَكَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, Allah is enough for you, and also those who follow you among the believers. And there's two interpretations of that. But the Sahaba are a Hujjah of Islam. And these people, I feel, these scholars that have focused on really purifying their hearts and struggling against their own inner temptations. These are the true proofs of Islam, because Islam, in the end of the day, is not about intellectual theories. It's not about a kind of Mormonism where you have some type of Boy Scout ethics and you be good people. There's plenty of ethical philosophies out there that are very adequate for creating nice civil societies, that we don't need Islam to do that. Right, really. But what Islam is ultimately, it is a vehicle to not only self-knowledge, but knowledge of who created you and where you came from and where you're going to. And that is one of the great gifts of having people in our ummah that continue to recognize that that ultimately is the purpose of Islam and why we were created. فَعَلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there's no God but Allah. So I hope that you listen attentively to what he says. He's both a simple speaker, and yet he's also a very subtle speaker. So his words are often very simple, but when you begin to actually analyze his argument, you will find that in it there are great subtleties that can often bypass people that are not paying attention to what he's saying. But you're all students, or most of you are students at SAوس, so I know you're the best and the brightest in London. So barakallah fikum inshallah.
الحمد لله الذي خلق الإنسان فكرمه وأنزل عليه الوحي فعظمه وصلى الله وسلم وبارك وكرم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد الأمين على وحي ربه الذي لا ينطق عن الهوى وعلى آبائه وإخوانه من الأنبياء والمرسلين ساداتنا آدم ونوح وإبراهيم وموسى وعيسى ومن بينهم من النبيين وعلى آل كل وصحبهم والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين.
So the Sheikh began by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created the human being, ennobled the human being, fashioned the human being, and then descended upon some of us revelations and magnified the meaning of that. And then prayers and peace upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was sent as a mercy and who was described as one who did not speak from caprice or from desire or passion, but only from what he was told by his Lord. And upon the other remaining fraternity of prophets and messengers, including Adam and Ibrahim and Idris and Isa and John and all of the prophets.
وبالرغم من قلة بضاعتي في اللغة الإنجليزية إلا أني قد شعرت بأني مدحت بما ليس في، فأسأل الله عز وجل أن يجعل ذلك دعاء أتحقق بمقتضاه، إذ علمنا مشايخنا أن إذا مدحنا بما ليس فينا أن نقول آمين، على اعتبار أن هذا المدح دعاء يرجى تحققه للممدوح وللمادح وللسامع آمين.
So the Habib Ali said, in spite of the fact that my ability in English And in other words, my commercial venture in this language is very insignificant. Nonetheless, I was discerning that in the introduction there was some praise of me that I am unworthy of. And I was taught by our teachers that whenever we are praised for things that we do not deem ourselves worthy of, we say after that, Ameen, believing that in fact it was actually a supplication for what we would hope Allah would help realize in our nature. And so in whatever you heard of my praise, I would just simply say Ameen, and I would also say it that it applies equally to those speaking and to those listening.
وموضوع هذه الليلة هو تساؤل: هل تحتاج الإنسانية إلى وحي؟ أي هل يستغني الإنسان بما أعطي من عقل ومكنة في هذا الوجود عن أن يتصل بتدبير خارج عن قدرته وإرادته يتعامل معه على أساس الانقياد له؟ أم أن الإنسان مستقل بترتيبه وبتدبيره يستغني عن وحي يأتيه ممن لا يراه؟ هذا الأمر لسنا بصدد إثبات وجود الإله فيه، لأن الذي يستبصر بأدنى مستوى من الاستبصار يستشعر أن الذي يدور حوالينا في هذا الوجود ليس بصدفة، ولو لم يكن لذلك مثال إلا مجيء الشيخ حمزة هذه الليلة لكان في ذلك نوع اعتبار.
Subhanallah. That's a really amazing beginning, because it was literally what we were just talking about in the taxi on our way here. Almost identical, exactly what I said to him. I said to my companion Isa al-Bogari that I can understand how certain people might not believe in revelation, but how can anyone deny that there is a creator behind the creation? So we were just talking about this subject without knowing what the topic here was going to be. And these, I mean, بعد إذنك يعني ممكن أعلق شوي. I call these events in life because in this event itself is a proof for anybody in this room that might not believe in God. These events I call glimpses of the unseen ocean that we on the shore of the seen world catch by simply believing in it. And if anybody has ever looked at an ocean, when they look at an ocean, most people turn their backs to the land behind them, and they can actually spend hours just looking at the ocean, and yet there's a lot more on the land to look at. But there is an awe that we have of the ocean, and if you look at the ocean, and I grew up on a beach, or nearby a beach, and if you look at the ocean, one of the things as an ocean watcher I can testify, you begin to wait for certain things to jump out of the ocean. So I would go and watch the whales migrate sometimes off the Pacific Ocean. And you wait with expectation of these extraordinary beasts coming out of the sea. And believers, when they turn to God, it is like turning to that ocean of the unseen world. And what God does because of your faith in it is He allows you to catch glimpses of these extraordinary creatures that exist in that unseen ocean. And they are these wonderful coincidences, as they're referred to in secular parlance, that indicate to us that there is a deep order. So what Habib Ali was just saying was the topic of his talk tonight is whether or not humanity is in need of revelation. And the question here is whether or not human beings can, given their intellectual capacities and the other abilities that they have with them, deem themselves independent and yet fulfill their needs that they have in terms of creating their societies and achieving their aims and objectives in this life, or whether or not they actually have need of a revelation from a creator. And while he said, as we were talking about earlier, there are people that might feel they have no need of a revelation, and yet, and this is more understandable than the denial of the existence of a intelligent force behind the universe. So while there are some people that might deny that there's communication from the creator of the universe, it is very hard to believe that there is not a creative power who is both intelligent and capable of bringing about this extraordinary phenomenon that we call existence.
الكلام عن تعامل الإنسان مع الشيء الخارجي عن إدراكه وفهمه وإرادته يرجع إلى أمرين: فهم للواقع الذي يحيط به، هذا الأمر الأول، ما الذي يحصل؟ هل هذا صدفة؟ هل هذا بتدبير الخالق؟ هل هناك قوة أخرى في هذا الوجود؟ هل هذا الأمر نوع خرق للأسباب أو ما يألفه العقل أم لا؟ هذا نوع، وهو فهم الواقع الذي يحيط به. من أنا؟ لماذا خلقت؟ ماذا يدور حوالي؟ ما هي الحقيقة التي تحيط بي؟ وهذا الأمر انشغل العالم اليوم بثقل تقدمه الحضاري المادي التجريبي بجزء أو بنظرية من نظريتين مهمتين لأينشتاين. النظرية الأولى نظرية النسبية. هذه النظرية هي التي يعيش العالم اليوم ويقتات عليها في دوران عجلة الحضارة التي يعيشها الناس اليوم، إلا أن هناك نظرية أخرى له أغفلت أو تغافل الناس عنها، وهي نظرية الحقيقة المطلقة. هذا نوع من فهم الإنسان للاتصال بما وراء الإدراك.
So if we look at how we interact and interrelate with our environs and our phenomenal world that we find ourselves in, there are two important aspects to this interaction. The first is how we understand reality, how we understand just the mere experience of being in existence. The question, what is my existential existence? Who am I? What am I here for? Is there purpose to my life? These are questions that all of us are confronted with, and this is the first aspect. If you look at the modern world and the extraordinary weight of modern progress and advancements that have so preoccupied modern humanity that they often fail to actually think about these very basic but ultimately very important questions. And if you look at there are two interesting views about the world that relate to the age we're in. One of them is the view of Einstein, which has been adopted or interpreted on many levels other than his physical explanation of certain phenomena. And that is the theory of relativity, the idea of the relativity of reality, that reality has this relative nature. But alongside that is another understanding that is often completely undermined or set aside or ignored, and that is the idea of absolute reality, that the reality that is not relative but is absolute.
النوع الثاني من صلة الإنسان بما لا يدرك حقيقة كنهه أو لا يحيط به، التصرف الذي يحصل من الإنسان على أساس اتصال بشيء يعتقد أنه يرتبط بالوحي الذي يأتي من الغيب. النوع الأول فهم الإنسان لما يحيط به. النوع الثاني تصرف الإنسان على أساس تعامل مع الغيب، جعل الوحي الذي يأتي من الغيب دليلا له في كيفية فهمه لما يحيط به واتخاذه القرار ليفعل أو لا يفعل. أنت أردت أن تفعل شيئا ما، كيف تقرر أفعل أو لا أفعل؟ الناس تقول بالعقل. كلمة العقل كلمة واسعة الدلالة، على أي عقل أو بأي عقل ستتصرف؟ هل منطلق العقول واحد وسير العقول واحد؟ إذن ستكون التصرفات واحدة، وهذا غير صحيح. إذن هناك نوعان من التصرف يحصل من قبل الإنسان: إما تصرف بمرجعية لما تمليه عليه نفسه أو ما يفهمه من أنه إملاء العقل، أو تصرف برجوع إلى طرف آخر. هذا الطرف الآخر إما أن يكون محسوسا صاحب عقل غيره، أو نظام موجود في الوجود أسس على أيدي العقول البشرية، أو اتصال بمعنى آخر من المرجعية هو المقصود من كلامنا هذه الليلة.
So, in looking at this other aspect, one aspect is how we interpret this world. But the other, which is looking at the idea of an absolute reality, is how we interpret the metaphysical world. In other words, a dimension that's beyond this dimension. And this, we can ask ourselves, what is the reference that we're going to use to interpret our world? One of them, obviously, is the idea of the intellect. But when we look at the word itself, intellect is a word that has an immense number of possible interpretations. In other words, what exactly is consciousness itself? So if we look at that, there's problems just with trying to get at some specific definition of what that means itself. And so how then does a human being interpret this world? What is his ultimate reference? Is it his self, so that we have some type of self-referential basis for all of our understandings in both the physical universe and also whatever metaphysical implications exist? And they always do. So, or is there another type of reference? In other words, something that is beyond our own selves, that is outside of ourselves. Is this reference that we return to, is this something that can be, in essence, trusted or taken seriously? And this is going to be the subject of what I want to speak about.
عندما يكون مسار الإنسان صحيحا بالمعنى المكتمل للصحة، فإن أحد النوعين من التعامل أو من النظر إلى الغيب أو الفهم للغيب سيدل على الآخر. نحن مسلمون، في القاعة من المسلمين عدد ومن غير المسلمين أيضا عدد. المسلمون كذلك أصحاب الأديان السماوية من اليهود أو النصارى يعتقدون بوجود الإله الذي يوجه الخطاب إلى البشر ليعملوا. في حال نضج هذا المعتقد، هذه مسألة أولى، نضج المعتقد وصحة المعتقد. المسألة الثانية في حال الصدق في تطبيق مقتضى هذا المعتقد، فهو سيدل الإنسان على كيفية التصرف بمقتضى الرجوع إلى الوحي. وعندما يكون المستمع غير مسلم أو غير مؤمن بوجود إله أو مرجع غيبي يرجع إليه، فإنه في حالة نظره إلى تصرفه في هذا الوجود، إذا بحث عن موافقة الفطرة التي خلق في الأصل عليها نقية، فهي ستدله حتما على حاجته إلى مرجع يرجع إليه ممن هو خارج البشر وإطار البشرية.
So if we look at human beings with what they've been given in terms of all of their abilities and essential nature, if these are sound, it people arrive at certain similar understandings. If you look, for instance, at Muslims, and many of the people in this room are Muslim, they have certain basic principles and understandings that they base their lives upon, and that makes sense to them based on their understanding. This is also true of other celestial dispensations like Christianity and Judaism. They have similar beliefs, and those beliefs ultimately become the reference by which they interpret certain aspects of existence. So whether that is sound or not, and the ability for us to use what we've been given in determining what we can and cannot do is based upon, first of all, the maturity of that understanding itself. What level of that understanding that we actually have. And also, it is based upon the soundness of one's internal state with that understanding. So there's an intellectual aspect to it, which is simply whether or not we have a sound or correct understanding. But there's also another aspect, which is the intentional aspect to the belief. What is the internal state of the person that has this belief? And that will determine whether or not the belief is working soundly or unsoundly for them.
الذين يعيشون صفاء الصلة بالطبيعة البكر، بالحياة التي لم تتعقد فيها منتجات صناعة الإنسان. وهنا ملاحظة: أكثر الناس تقدما في أكثر المجتمعات تقدما في منتجات الحضارة المادية يجد راحته إذا خرج إلى مكان ليس فيه أثر للإنسان. تراه يرتاح إذا ذهب إلى نزهة في غابات طبيعية لم تتدخل فيها أيدي البشر، يرتاح إذا ذهب إلى الصحراء، يرتاح إذا ذهب إلى البحر، يشعر براحة أكثر كلما اقترب من مكان لم تعبث به يد الإنسان. هذا شيء موجود في نفس من يعيش في أكثر مجتمعات ودول العالم تطورا وتقدما في نتاج الحضارة المادية. على ماذا يدل هذا الأمر؟ هذا يرتبط بصفاء الذهن الذي يعيشه من يرتبط بالطبيعة التي قل تدخل الإنسان فيها. لهذا لما قالوا لأحد البدو من الأعراب، قالوا له يكلمونه عن إثبات وجود الإله، فتكلم بديهة بغير حاجة إلى إعادة نظر وتفكير. قال: البعرة تدل على البعير، والأثر يدل على المسير، فسماء ذات أبراج وأرض ذات فجاج ألا تدل على صانع خالق قدير.
So the Sheikh said that one of the interesting aspects of human beings is that when human beings are connected to virginal nature, they have certain experiences based upon that connection. And people that are still living in these natural states often share common characteristics. But another interesting aspect of this is that if you go to civilizations that have reached very high levels of progress and very high levels of culture and of human artifice, you will find that those very people that live in the midst of this extraordinary civilization and technology and progress find that their most tranquil periods of time are time spent completely away from all of that human artifice. And when they find themselves in areas like the desert or like forests or at the ocean where there is almost no trace of human manipulation of the world, they find a type of tranquility and a peace that they don't find in the midst of all of the hustle and bustle of what they have created. And these people who live in these virginal areas of the world, you will often find that they have a very clear and distinct understanding of the world that is almost arrived at intuitively without any effort. An example of that, the Sheikh said, is that a Bedouin was once asked how he understood the existence of God. And the Bedouin said that he was a Aboriginal person, and traces were part of his understanding. So he said, if I see camel dung, I know a camel has passed by. If I see donkey dung, I know a donkey's passed by. If I see the traces of a human, I know a human's been here. So this celestial dome with all of its constellations, this earth with all of its diversity and pathways, and this ocean containing the majestic waves, don't all of these indicate a creator who's capable and knowing and all-powerful?
نحن نعيش اليوم سرعة دوران عجلة بناء الإنسان لشؤون على شؤون من نتائج ما يراه من منجزات يده، إلى الحد الذي وصل فيه الإنسان إلى رتبة يصح أن نسميها انحطاطا وسقوطا وهويا، صار يخسر كل شيء في إنسانيته وهو لا يشعر، وصار يحطم كل شيء يحيط به وهو أيضا لا يشعر، في سبيل الوصول إلى ماذا؟ إذا تأمل في النهاية لا شيء.
So if we look at the state of our present day humanity in these technologically advanced environments, what we're witnessing is an increasingly a wheel of human endeavor that is increasingly speeding up to the point where we're moving at a pace where it becomes out of our control. And so we begin to actually destroy the environment around us. With all of this extraordinary technological advancement and progress, we begin to watch our own humanity literally being taken away from us. We begin to see devastation and social disintegration before our very eyes, and yet many of us do not even notice that it's happening. Many of us are unaware that these very things are taking place before our very eyes, and we are losing that very thing that makes us human.
الإنسان خليفة الله في الأرض. إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة. خليفة الإنسان خليفة من سبقه من المخلوقات كالجن من حيث أنه خلفهم في الأرض، لكنه خليفة الله من حيث أن الله هو الذي استخلفه. إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة.
The human being is a vicegerent on the earth. This is the human purpose. According to the Quran, God said to his creation, I am placing in the earth a vicegerent. And that vicegerent is the human being. On the one hand, the khilafah or vicegerency indicates that this is a replacement for what was before it. So each generation replaces the generation that went before it, and also the humanity was a replacement for a previous sapiential group of beings here known as the jinn or the sprite world. And this khilafah that we have been given is from God. This is our purpose.
بالمعنى الآخر الذي يفهمه من لا يؤمن بوجود الإله الحق عز وجل، الإنسان متصرف في هذا الوجود.
Another explanation of this very meaning for those who might not have some sort of revelatory reference to understand these things, we would simply say human beings have been put here to act and to work in the world with a type of volition that does not exist in other creatures.
الإنسان الخليفة يشعر أن العالم الذي يحيط به أمانة في عنقه، فلهذا هو يتعامل معه على أساس أنه يأخذ منه حاجته، ما يحتاجه ليعيش ليؤدي مهمته في الحياة، مع مراعاة الحفاظ على الأمانة التي تحيط به. لكن الإنسان الذي لا يعيش معنى الخلافة في الأرض، يعيش معنى أنه سيد العالم فحسب، يخرج عن حدود أخذ حاجته من العالم إلى مرحلة سماها الله بالترف المترفين. الترف هذا أن يعيش الإنسان ليتمتع فقط للمتعة، لا لتكون المتعة وسيلة لتجديد نشاطه وهمته للقيام بمهمة، تصبح الوسيلة غاية عند الإنسان. لهذا لا نستغرب إذا رأيناه يحطم ما يحيط به وفي النهاية يحطم نفسه.
So if we look at this idea of the ability to act in the world, if on the one hand you have an understanding that it's purposeful and that you have this vicegerency, you see your ability in the world as a sacred trust. And you begin to work in the world and you take your needs from the world because this is part of the purpose, but at the same time you're aware of this trust that you have with the world that prevents you from exploiting the world, from taking more than you actually need, from depriving others through your own greed. On the other hand, if you have this view of the world that you are simply the master of creation and you can do as you please, and you begin to see yourself as independent without any responsibility, then these type of people will begin to view life as simply a means for enjoying themselves, for attaining what they want of power or whatever other object of desire, without any reverence or understanding of the trust. And these very people will begin to actually destroy the very thing that is sustaining them and others, and they will destroy it because they have taken as a means, they have taken it as an end, as opposed to seeing it as a means to another objective.
عندنا في الشريعة في تعامل الإنسان من منطلق الخلافة، الإنسان حريص على كل شيء يحيط به، حتى على الأرض التي يطأها، حتى على الماء الذي يشرب منه أو يغتسل. يقول الفقهاء عندنا نقلا عن السنة أنه يكره للمتوضئ الإسراف في صب الماء في الوضوء ولو توضأ على شط البحر أو النهر. يقول ابن رسلان مكروهه في الوضوء حيث أسرف ولو من البحر الكبير اغترف، أي ولو اغترف من البحر ليتوضأ يكره له أن يسرف. لما؟ لأن الإسراف تعد على معنى الأمانة في الاستخلاف في الأرض في التعامل مع الخلق الذي خلقه الله فيما يحيط بنا.
So if you look at this nature of human interaction with the creation that surrounds humanity, in our tradition we have an understanding that it should not be with extravagance, that we should be utilizing what we need without going or transgressing any boundaries. An example of this, even within the Islamic juristic tradition, is the idea of when we do ritual purification with water, there's an understanding that water conservation is actually part of the devotional practice. And so one of the Shafi'i scholars said that it is makruh or reprehensible to waste water when one is using it for devotional practices or otherwise, even if one was taking it from a vast ocean. That just the mere fact that it is israf, that it is unnecessary usage, even if there was plenty to go around, is still reprehensible because of the very act of wasting something that one does not need to waste.
بينما العالم اليوم لما تعامل مع هذا الأمر الماء بغير إحساس بالخلافة صار مسرفا في استخدام الماء إلى حد العبث، ثم واجهته مشكلة هذا الإسراف فأخذ يفكر كيف يتخلص من الماء الذي يصرف الذي قد تلوث بسوء استخدامه، فيبحث أين يذهب به، فإما يضعه في الأرض فيلوث الأرض بعد ذلك لتعود بالضرر عليه في تلويث المياه الجوفية، أو يطلقه في البحر ليلوث البحر ويؤذي المخلوقات الموجودة في البحر بعد ذلك، فهو يعيش اضطراب لنتيجة وهي أنه تصرف بغير استشعار لمعنى الخلافة في هذه الأرض.
So if we look at for instance, the modern world and the extraordinary waste of this extraordinary resource called water, if we look at what modern man has done with this resource, because of the lack of feeling this sacred trust, with the natural resources of the world, he begins to not only waste the water, but actually to pollute the very water that's sustaining him. So he takes the effects of his production and dumps them in the earth and begins to pollute the water table. So when the water comes up and they want to benefit from it, they start getting sick from this water because of what they've done to themselves. Or, on the other hand, if they dump it in the ocean without reflecting on the impact that it has there, then they harm all of these sea creatures that have done nothing wrong to acquire this harm. So human beings begin to actually destroy the very thing that's sustaining them because they have no sense of this trust that has been given them with these resources.
ثم يشتكي الإنسان بعد ذلك نتاج عبثه في التعامل مع الكون الذي يحيط به، فتقابل الإنسان مشكلة المياه التي يعدونها اليوم من أكبر مشكلات العالم، مع أن الماء ليس بالانعدام الذي يترتب عليه شأن الإشكال لولا سوء تصرف الإنسان. أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا. هذا المعنى في استشعار الإنسان لفقد الماء أساسه سوء تصرف الإنسان. أيضا شعور الإنسان بخطر وأمراض تتفشى في مجتمعه لا يكاد يسيطر عليها، كلما أخذ بزمام مرض وأحاط به تفشى المرض الثاني. يشتكي الناس المأكولات التي تأتي من البحر في كثير من المناطق في العالم أصبحت ملوثة، لا يستطيع الإنسان التصرف الأكل وهو آمن من نتاجها. الآبار اليوم التي تحفر يستخرج الناس كثيرا من المياه من كثير من الآبار وقد تلوثت بسوء تصرف الإنسان، بل لقد لوثنا حتى الماء الذي يأتي من السماء، فصار في بعض المناطق تنزل الأمطار الكيماوية من آثار سوء تصرف الإنسان في الأرض. ومن المتضرر بعد ذلك في الدنيا قبل الآخرة؟ الإنسان.
So if we look at this extraordinary state of humans, after they do all of this, all of these terrible things, they actually, to add insult to injury, they start complaining about the situation. And they begin to complain about the very thing that they've brought about. So they complain about the fact that things are getting polluted. They complain about the state of the water. They complain about their food. If you look, for instance, at the food now, this food that's being produced, it begins to harm people, and then the people complain about it. It's because they've transgressed these boundaries. If you look, for instance, at the many places now on the earth, people who actually traditionally gain their sustenance from the oceans are now actually being harmed by the very food that they're consuming. People no longer feel safe in eating many of the things that the earth produces, not because anything was wrong in the first place, but because of what humans have done to themselves, what humans have done to the earth itself. And so they begin to live the results of their own poor use of all of these extraordinary gifts that have been given to them, and they begin to complain about it. The Quran asks them a question: have you not considered well the water that you drink? We have sent it down from rain-filled clouds. And had we wanted, we would have made this water, the royal we, had we wanted, we would have made this water bitter for you, difficult for you to actually drink. Don't you show gratitude? Don't you reflect on these things? So the Quran is asking us to contemplate the fact that our water is in this state of purity that God has sent it, and had God willed, He could have made it terrible to drink. And so this is in order that we actually begin to feel a sense of gratitude for what we've been given. And this sense of gratitude will engender in turn a sense of trust that we have to preserve, that we have a trust with these things that we've been given. And if we lose sight of that trust and begin to squander these things, then we suffer the consequences of the evil of our own hands.
هذا مثل بسيط لا يتسع الوقت لاستقصاء جوانب الحياة. لو تأمل كل منكم بعد ذلك بمفرده مشكلة التلوث النووي، مشكلة النفايات الموجودة في الأرض، مشكلة النفايات الناتجة عن وسائل المواصلات التي استحدثها الإنسان، المشاكل التي ترى، جنون البقر الذي أصله جنون البشر، الاستقصاء. لو تأملنا جميع المشاكل المعضلة في هذا العالم لوجدنا أنها نتاج لصنع الإنسان، وإذا غصنا بتأمل وتفكر وتدبر لوجدنا أن ذلك نتاج لشطط الإنسان، لشطحة الإنسان في رغبته لمجرد التلذذ والتنعم، مجرد التمتع، مجرد الاستتباع، الاستجابة لكل ما تطلبه النفس. تريد نفسي كذا أفعل، تريد نفسي كذا أفعل، حتى جاوز ذلك إلى عبادات الناس. اليوم يشتكون عندنا في مكة في الحج من عدم اتساع منى للناس. ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما يقول إن منى كرحم المرأة، كلما كبر الطفل اتسعت. هذا المعنى، أي أنه مهما ورد أناس ستتسع لهم. الواقع يقول أنها قسمت بالخيم، ما وسعت الناس. ما الاختلال الذي حصل؟ لو تأملنا قليلا، الإنسان رغبته في التمتع الزائد. عندما يستأجر أحد الأثرياء 4 أو 5 خيام، خيمة ينام فيها وحده، وخيمة لملابسه، وخيمة لاستقبال ضيوفه، وخيمة لزوجته، وخيمة لساعة العصر، وخيمة للصباح، وخيمة لتليفوناته واتصالاته، أخذ مكان ل100 نفر وهو نفر واحد لأنه يستطيع أن يدفع. فكل اختلال يعيشه الإنسان اليوم ليس سببه اختلال في العالم، لكن اختلال في تصرف الإنسان.
So the Sheikh said that if this is only one small example that I've given you, if you disperse tonight and go and begin to reflect, you can reflect on many of these problems, on the problem of nuclear waste, on the problem of all of the byproducts of our industries, the poisonous byproducts that what they call toxic waste matters, and reflect on the fact that these things are being dumped and being put into places. If we look at all of the problems that they're creating, and even like mad cow's disease, again, the human hand is evident in all of these problems. We cannot see these problems coming from nature, but rather they're coming from the extravagances of human beings, from the activities of human beings that are done with a desire to acquire more than they need, with a desire to get something through other means than natural means. And all of these things, in the end, again, return to the human being. If we look at what we've been given, the fact is not only is there more than enough, but the world will always increase us as our needs, if their true needs, increase. So for instance, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said about a place near Mecca where a lot of the pilgrims go, that this place is like a womb, that it will actually become more expansive as the janeen or the embryo becomes bigger. And this is true also for those who go on pilgrimage for the sake of God. They will find the space that they need, because the Creator is a Creator that has facilitated for human beings what they need. On the other hand, if human beings, because of their power, because of their wealth, because of their abilities, begin to take more than they need. So a man takes one domicile for himself, another for his clothes, another for his wife, another for his a place where he speaks on the telephone, another for his guests, another for this and for that, until he's got so many houses that it actually is enough for 100 people, and yet he's only one person. And so he's consumed all of this far beyond what he actually needs, because of extravagance within his own self and because of a power to the detriment of others. So whenever we find this extravagance, it's always to the detriment of others, but ultimately to our own selves. And the problem again returns to the human being.
هذا في أثر الإنسان على العالم، في تخريبه للعالم في أشد وأعلى وأرقى مراتب تطوره الحضاري فيما يظن. أما أثر تخريب الإنسان للإنسان فهو الأمر الذي تسطر فيه مجلدات تسيل بها الدموع دما لمن يعتبر ويخرج من سكرة الحياة التي يعيشها الناس اليوم. تخريب الإنسان للإنسان.
We have been looking at the human devastation on our environment. We haven't even begun to address actually a much more grievous problem, which is human devastation on fellow humans, on what human beings do to other human beings. And if we look, this is something that could fill tomes of books. Volumes could be written on what human beings have done to other human beings. And tears that are mixed with blood can be wept over contemplating the devastation that humanity has wrought on fellow humanity.
ابتداء من الإنسان في نفسه، كيف خسر الإنسان إنسانيته وهو يلهث خلف مطامع نفسه، كيف تحول الإنسان إلى خادم للمادة التي جعلت لتخدمه. الإنسان يسارع إلى تطوير شؤون الحياة، الخدمات، الاتصال، النقل، التعاملات، المال، اللباس، الطعام، الوسائل التي يسارع إلى تطويرها. ترتب على مسارعته إلى تطويرها بغير تبصر وربط بالمقاصد أنه صار من أجل أن يحصل هذا وهذا 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 يحتاج أن يدفع الثمن، المال، وحتى يحصل المال يحتاج أن يعمل ويعمل 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 حتى صار أكثر حياته 8 ساعات على الأقل في اليوم والليلة، هو يكد ويتعب ثلث عمره يمر عليه، غير الوقت الذي يمر للنوم للطعام للشراب، ثلث عمره يمر وهو لا يتمتع، لا، لكن يبحث ويلهث ويجهد ويتعب حتى يحصل المال ليتمتع بعد ذلك، فيمر عليه الوقت الطويل في عمره. وإذا تأمل لحظة لوجد أنه لا يأخذ حضارة الخدمات لتخدمه، لكن حضارة الخدمات أخذته ليخدمها، فتحول الناس اليوم كأنهم عمال في مصنع كبير وهو صغير في حقيقته، الكل يخدم لمصلحة من؟ لا يدري الإنسان. هذا في نفسه. في الأسرة أصبح الأب ليست له صلة بأولاده، الأم غير قادرة على بث معاني الحنان التي تنبغي للأولاد، الصلة في المجتمع، الجيران، الأقارب، الأب والأم. أن يمر على الإنسان الشهر والثاني والثالث والسنة لا يفكر أن يذهب إلى الأب أو الأم الكبيران في السن ليدخل السرور عليهما. هذا تحطيم لإنسانية الإنسان، هذا على مستوى الفرد، الأسرة، المجتمع. أما إذا تكلمنا على مستوى الدول، الله ما أقبح ما وصل إليه الإنسان من تخريب لنفسه.
So if we look again at what human beings are doing, panting behind their material pursuits, desirous of all of these things, willing to serve materialism to the degree that human beings work out. They sleep a third of their lives, but they work for a third, at least a third of their lives, with incredible effort and struggle, and not enjoyable for the vast majority of them. And they're working for what? They're working so that they can take some small portion of their overall life for a third, at least a third of their lives, with incredible effort and struggle, and not enjoyable for the vast majority of them. And they're working for what? They're working so that they can take some small portion of their overall life and they will enjoy it. So they're working for some pleasure that they'll derive on the weekend after their hard week of work, or for their vacation. But they find the majority of their existence is actually very unenjoyable and quite difficult. So these people we can liken them to a group of people that are working in a vast factory, and they're all laboriously and diligently striving away day after day. But if you ask them, what is it that you're building? Where is it that you're going? What are you actually doing all this for? What is the purpose of this factory? None of them can give you a sound answer. And so you see these people out there running around for all of this material world, panting behind their own desires and impulses and not really fully even understanding what is the object of all of that effort. You see those people, for instance, who have harmed themselves so that their own souls are harmed because of the ways that they're living. But then look, even their families, the breakdown of their family before their very eyes because of their own neglect. And they see that their children are losing any desire to have compassion towards their parents, that the parents are often losing this compassionate nature that traditionally was so profound in parents, so they begin to treat their children without any serious respect or love. And then you begin to see how they treat their relatives, either near or far, never visiting them, never actually doing things to bring joy to their kin and their own blood bonds. You see these people also completely ignoring their neighbors, not even aware sometimes of their existence, of their names. And then you see that above all of this, then this is at the level of the individual and society, and then you have the calamitous nature of what we call international relations, how nations treat other nations. And this, the destructive nature of all of these relationships, is so overwhelming. But the worst that we see also is often how one group of nations or a nation treat another group.
الشعارات التي ترفع اليوم في ميادين السياسة العالمية والتي صورتها إرادة الوصول إلى إنقاذ الإنسان لتحقيق قيم يتكلم عنها: الحرية، حقوق المرأة، محاربة الإرهاب، ترقية تثقيف العالم، نشر الديمقراطية بين الناس. في النتيجة ما محصلة هذا الذي يسمى بهذه الأسماء البراقة؟ حقوق المرأة ماذا أثمرت؟ تحولت المرأة بها إلى سلعة تباع وتشترى، تعرض وراء الزجاجات في بعض العواصم عارية السن والطول والعرض والوزن والشهادة الصحية وقيمة الليلة. هذه الثمرة التي توصل الناس إليها. الكلام عن الحرية، الفرق بين الحرية وبين الفوضى شعرة. الحرية شيء مقدس في الدين عندنا. الحرية هي قيمة الإنسان، إعطاؤه الاختيار، وهديناه النجدين. لكن أن تتحول إلى فوضى ليفعل الإنسان ما شاء كيف ما شاء. محاربة الإرهاب أمر أمرنا الله تعالى به، من العبادة أن نحارب الإرهاب، لكن أن نحول شعار محاربة الإرهاب إلى تسييس وتجنين للإرهاب تسيل به الدماء في شرق الأرض وفي غربها، المسألة هنا تختلف.
So if we look at all of these wonderful political slogans that seem to be moving humanity today and leading them on, the slogans of freedom, the slogans of women's rights, the slogans of spreading democracy around the world, these wonderful, bright and brilliant slogans that people banter about and the politicians are constantly talking about. If we actually look at what it is that is being spread around the world, if we take these slogans and begin to actually analyze things like women's rights, is it then women's rights when they become merely an object of a commodity that is bought and sold, where their bodies are put up on billboards around the society in order to sell products, where she loses her basic dignity because she becomes merely an object of desire and is not seen as a woman any longer? Or if we look, for instance, at freedom, freedom itself, liberty is something that our religion holds in the highest of stature. That liberty is the ability that God has given human beings to choose. And there's nothing higher in the world in terms of these gifts that people have been given than the gift of freedom of choice, that people can choose what they do. But there is an important difference between freedom and libertinism. which is a type of moral and social anarchy where people have no constraints on their behavior and no longer do things in accordance with what is most beneficial for them. The Quran says, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, we guided human beings to two roads, the road of good and the road of wrong, the road of right and the road of wrong. And these roads are traditionally clear to people. That if we look at this idea of fighting terrorism, which is one of the political slogans of the time that we're living in, fighting terrorism is an obvious and desirable state for any society. And certainly in our tradition, that is one of the most important aspects of government, is to prevent any type of calamitous harm from occurring to citizens. So this is acceptable. But when the war on terrorism becomes an excuse for the bloodshed of innocent people, when in both the East and the West we see human beings being slaughtered in the name of something, when they did no crime, they perpetrated no crime on anybody, their blood was innocent, and yet in the name of protecting them, we destroy them, then something is wrong.
عندما كنت صغيرا في طفولة كنت أسمع أحد كبار السن من الصلحاء وأراه يشمئز من الكهرباء، من الإضاءة بالكهرباء، ويقول هذه شر من ورائها سيأتي. وكنا نضحك، وكنا أيضا نرى الذين أكبر منا في السن الذين هم كانوا شباب في ذلك الوقت يسخرون من هذا الرجل الكبير في السن. ثم بعد ذلك في مرحلة التعليم سألت أحد مشايخنا الربانيين، شيخنا الحبيب عبد القادر السقاف، قلت له سيدي هذا الرجل صالح كان من أهل النور، فلماذا هو متجهم ومتضايق من الكهرباء وهي وسيلة يسرها الله تعالى للناس؟ قال يا ولدي هو لا يرفض وسيلة يسرها الله للناس، لكنه مشمئز من المنطلق الذي يتعامل به مع الوسيلة. حفظت الكلام، دونته عندي، لكن لم أستوعبه جيدا في ذلك الوقت. اليوم هذا الذي نعيشه اليوم من الخراب الذي في العالم، من تدمير الإنسان للإنسان، من تضييع العمر الذي تعيشونه حتى أنتم في جامعاتكم. كم سنة تقضيها في الابتدائية، في المتوسط، في الثانوي، مع اختلاف الأنظمة؟ كم سنة تقضيها في الجامعة؟ كم سنة بعد ذلك للماجستير ثم للدكتوراه؟ ما هدفك؟ إن كان المقصود المعرفة الراقية التي بها تستطيع أن تنشر الخير في العالم، أنت ولو أنفقت 100 سنة إن مد عمرك فأنت على خير. لكن كم نسبة الذين هدفهم المعرفة ونشر الخير بين الناس الذين يدخلون في النظام الجامعي اليوم ليخرجوا على هذا النحو؟ وكم نسبة الذين يدخلون أفكارهم عندما أتخرج أريد أن أشتري كذا وأبني كذا وأعمل كذا، أريد الوظيفة الفلانية في المجال الفلاني، كيف أسبق غيري، كيف أحقق كذا، كيف أصل إلى كذا. ففكره لا في عظمة ما أوصله الله إلى الإنسان من معرفة، ولكن فكره في كيفية تسخير هذه النعمة في تحقيق مطالب ذاته هو، في العلو، في الترفع، في التميز، في التعزز، في سبق الغير، والتي تترجم بعد ذلك في ميدان العالم بالظلم والجبروت، تترجم في تخريب العالم الذي نعيشه اليوم. والناس تمر بهم عجلة الحياة وهم لا يشعرون أن العالم اليوم يعيش فشلا في إنسانيته، يعيش فشلا في تعامله مع أمانة الخلافة. وليس هذا الكلام نظرة تشاؤم لشيء انتهى، لكنه مفتاح لنفقه كيف نبحث عن الطريق. ليس الطريق مدينة أفلاطون، المدينة الفاضلة التي يقرأ عنها عند الفلاسفة. الطريق كيف نبحث عن منهج نظريته حقيقة، ومعنى حقيقة أنها أثمرت في الواقع. كيف وصل الناس في عصر من العصور إلى مستوى صارت فيه الصدقة يدار بها، هل من مستحق للصدقة؟ فلا يجدون فقير يستحق الصدقة حتى يعطى. عندما يصل مجتمع إلى هذا المستوى في أقل من 2 تطبيقا للوحي السماوي، عندما يصل المجتمع من الرقي في إحساسه بالعالم الذي يحيط به إلى حد أن توقف أوقاف وأراضي ليؤخذ ريعها لإطعام الحمام الذي يحط على الأرض، عندما يصل الإنسان في تقدمه وفي حضارته إلى هذا المستوى العالي الذي صار يبني فيه أماكن السقيا في كل مكان في الصحراء في طريق الناس، طلبا للتقرب إلى الله بخدمة الناس، لا طلبا لاستخدام الناس واستعباد الناس في صورة خدمة الناس، عندئذ يشعر الإنسان أنه قد صار إنسانا. وهذا يكمن في عظمة الوحي الذي جاء لا بخزعبلات ولا بهرطقات أو بتخرصات، لكنه جاء بمنهج جعل بلال الحبشي الذي كانت الجاهلية القديمة التي هي أرحم بكثير من جاهلية اليوم كانت تنظر إليه أنه محتقر يداس بالنعال، جعلته يطأ بنعله هو بقدمه هو ظهر الكعبة في أقدس مكان على الأرض، ويقول الله أكبر الله أكبر، التي حولت أعظم شيء وهو نفس الإنسان. جعلت عمر الذي كان يلطم أخته على الكلمة فيسيل دمها ويدفن ابنته بيده وهي حية ويأكل الصنم الذي يعبده، يجعله يرتقي من هذا الكبر والسلف إلى مستوى ينظر به إلى ذلك العبد الحبشي فيقول في حق أبي بكر، لأنه الذي اشترى سيدنا بلال من الظالم الذي يعذب وأعتقه، أبو بكر سيدنا وأعتق سيدنا. هذا المستوى من رقي الإنسانية الذي جعل عمر بن الخطاب، وقد جاءت إمبراطورية الروم خاضعة تحته وإمبراطورية الفرس خاضعة تحته، يحمل قربة من ماء وهو أمير المؤمنين يسير بها في السوق، يسير بها في السوق، فينظر إليه سلمان الفارسي ويقول ما تصنع يا أمير المؤمنين، أحمل عنك، فيقول إليك عني، إنما خفت على نفسي العجب لما رأيت رسل الروم والفرس تأتي إلي خاضعة، خشيت على نفسي الكبر والعجب، فحملت القربة حتى أهذب نفسي فأخذها إلى بيت بعض فقراء المسلمين وصب الماء لهم في زيرهم. هذا المعنى العالي اليوم نحن بحاجة إلى أن نتصل بوحي السماء من أجله، وهذا الحديث مفاتيح من أراد أن يتوسع فيه فليعش حياة التأمل والتفكر وليرجع إلى كلام الله سبحانه وتعالى، الكلام العظيم الذي لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ولا من خلفه. أسأل الله لنا ولكم كمال التوفيق. سامحنا استمريت
ما شاء الله. The Sheikh said when he was a young lad, he used to hear some of the older people, and particularly one man he heard saying about the electricity that had entered into the village. This is a bad thing. And he said he remembered at that time that the young boys that he was with, they laughed at this old man and thought that he was silly, that he couldn't see the progress that was in this thing. And because he heard this from several different people, when he was a little older, he asked one of the wise people from that area, why do some of the older people not like this electricity when it's a means to something that's very good and positive? And he said that at the time the Sheikh said something to him that he actually remembered writing down because he didn't fully understand it, but he knew it was important. He said that they're not upset with the thing in and of itself, but what troubles them is what it's being used for and how we're using it. And he said it wasn't until he got much older and began to really reflect on how this technology has been used in the world that he realized that there was actually an immense amount of wisdom. If you look at human beings and purpose, this is something that often people don't contemplate the actual purpose of things. Why are we doing this thing? Why are we using it? If you look at your own experience in school, you went to your grade school, and then you went to your elementary, your middle school, and your high school, and this differs in terms of its basic structures from society to society, but the basic principles of modern education are the same. You move along this route and progress to higher levels and stages of education until finally you reach the university. how many people are actually doing this with an understanding that the reason I'm doing this is in order that I might acquire knowledge that is going to be beneficial to the world, that is going to actually help other people as well. So many of the people that are in these schools are in fact thinking of nothing other than how can I get a job? How can I serve myself? How can I find the means to my self-gratification? And this becomes the purpose for their studies, for their endeavors, that they simply want this. And so their entire thought processes are actually moving towards subjugation, towards exploitation, because this is ultimately what is rooted in their desire in the world, is how can I use these things around me in order to serve me, to facilitate my enjoyment in the world. And because of that, they begin to basically oppress. And we like to look at the oppression outside the world and look at political oppression and look at how these political structures are behaving and working. But very few of us are willing to actually reflect on our own purposes and intentions and not realize that those things that we see outside of ourselves that are so odious are driven by the very same things that are driving us in our little worlds. That it is only a reflection of the very same things that are driving us as individuals. These same drives exist in the people that are doing all these terrible things in the world. And so what we have to, at a certain point, realize is this increasing acceleration of the destruction and disintegration of humanity is nothing other than a testimony to the fact that we are a complete societal failure, that we are, in essence, a failed project. And if we think about this, the purpose that I am saying this is not so that you fall into a despair. It's not so that you begin to throw your hands up and say, what's the point? It's actually that you might reflect on the possibility of an alternative to this situation. And the alternative that I'm talking about is not Plato's utopia. It's not the republic that exists in the minds of people and has never actually existed in any real or pragmatic sense. I'm talking about a system that at one point actually cared for the poor and the needy. I'm talking about societies that actually put water places all over the deserts as an act of charitable trust, not to make any money, but only because they wanted to draw closer to their Lord in service of His creation. I'm talking about trusts that were given for the caretaking of birds, so that birds would actually be fed, of dogs, of cats in our cities. I'm talking about a society that when one ruler became the head of it, within 2 years, he achieved something unprecedented, and that is that there was not one poor person that could be found in need. That the needs of the impoverished were actually being fulfilled by the society because of a governor who happened to actually be serving the people and utilize everything that he had in his power to do that. When this is the type of motivation in human beings, in a society, one can truly stand up and feel a sense of pride that he can actually call him or herself a human being. That they can feel a pride that they are a human being. And this is the religion that Bilal, the Ethiopian, who was a slave, and in the time before Islam and in the early period of his Islamic life, he was somebody who some of the people of the Arab people, because he was a black Ethiopian, actually would put their sandals on his face in order to humiliate and insult him. That this man, within 20 years, actually puts his sandal on the holiest of holy places, which was the roof of the Kaaba itself, in order for him to call the prayer.
بأمر النبي العربي.
Because an Arabian prophet commanded him to do that. So the Ethiopian slave who was being stepped on in the time when ignorance ruled was now stepping on the holiest of holy places with his own sandal by the command of his prophet in order to call people to prayer. That I'm talking about Umar ibn al-Khattab, a man who struck his sister because she was reciting Quran, a man who buried his own daughter alive because he considered her a shame and a possible blemish on his own honor. This man who would actually become one of the rulers of the Muslims was a man who carried on his own back a water jug when he was the ruler of an increasingly powerful government that would eventually rule in his lifetime Persia and the Byzantine. That this man, when he was asked by another companion why, as the prince of the believers, why he was carrying a water jug on his back, and he said, I looked at the Roman rulers and saw how arrogant they had become, and I was fearful that anything like that would enter my heart, so I wanted to do this as a practice to keep me humbled in the position that I have been entrusted with from my Lord. And he used to make it his practice to take this water and to actually give water to the poor people in Medina as a way, because this was a time they didn't have running water, so they had to bring water to their houses. So he actually would, as the ruler of the city and of a large system of government, he would actually serve the poorest elements of society in confirmed traditions as a way of breaking his own ego and preventing himself from becoming what he feared power might make him if he submitted to it and allowed that to take over. This is a man who, when Abu Bakr freed Bilal, that same slave, he said about that slave, he said, Abu Bakr is my master, and he freed another of my masters, Bilal, the Ethiopian. And so this is something that we know has existed in human history. And there are many examples of human beings that were not driven by merely material concerns, by desires to exploit, by desires to get all they could for their own self-gratification, but human beings that were motivated by higher principles, by divine principles. And this is something that if you go back and just examine the book of Allah, which is the Quran, you will find these very meanings embodied in that book. You will find that in that book are the very principles that are so sorely needed by the current humanity in order to prevent it from continual disintegration and dissolution until nothing is left of our humanity. And may God grant you success in achieving what you will need in order, and what we all need in order to change our conditions.
أسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى لنا ولكم كمال التوفيق. اللهم إنا نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم أصلح لنا ظواهرنا وبواطننا. اللهم ردنا إليك مردا جميلا. اللهم أصلح شؤوننا ما ظهر منها وما بطن. اللهم رقنا في مراتب الصدق واجعلنا من خواص أهل الصدق. اللهم إنك خلقتنا لعبادتك ومكنتنا في هذه الأرض للخلافة عنك فيها، فنسألك اللهم حسن القيام بما أمرتنا به وحسن الثبات على ما أردته منا. اللهم إنا نستغفرك ونتوب إليك من كل ذنب أو معصية أو زلل أو خطأ أو إساءة أو تجرؤ أو إيصال سوء إلى أحد من العالمين. نسألك اللهم إلا ما غفرت ما مضى من ذنوبنا، وإلا ما تحملت عنا التبعات، وإلى ما حفظتنا فيما هو آت. اللهم إن ليالينا وأيامنا قد تقضت ومرت علينا ونحن في شؤون أنت بها أعلم، ومرت علينا شؤون أنت بها أعلم، وعلى سترها أقدر وعلى غفرها أحلم. نسألك اللهم نظرة إلينا تصلح بها أمراض قلوبنا، وتغفر بها ذنوبنا، وتستر بها عيوبنا، وتهيئنا بها لنظرة منك في إقبال شهر رمضان علينا. اللهم اجعل هذا الموسم موسم رحمة، اللهم اجعل هذا الموسم موسم رحمة، اللهم اجعل هذا الموسم موسم رحمة. اللهم أصلح منا ما ظهر وما بطن فيه، اغفر لنا وارحمنا واعتق النار. اللهم إنك تكرم في أول ليلة من ليالي رمضان عبادك باطلاعة تطلع بها عليهم، فيا عالم السر وأخفى، يا من يعلم خائنة الأعين وما تخفي الصدور، أكرمنا في أول ليالي هذا الشهر برفع للقدر، بصدق في الإقبال عليك، في ثبات بحق الوفاء بالوعد والعهد الذي قد أخذته منا. اللهم إنك قد جمعتنا في عالم الأرواح وقلت لنا ألست بربكم، فقلنا جميعا بلى شهدنا. وها نحن الآن وقد أودعت أرواحنا في قوالب أجسامنا، قد صرنا أشتاتا، فمن مؤمن ومن كافر، ومن مستقيم ومن فاجر، ومن عالم ومن جاهل، ومن مقبل ومن معرض. ولا شك أن أيام هذه الدنيا الغرور التي غرتنا وأغرت كثيرا من الخلق، لا شك أنها منقضية منتهية فانية، يوشك أن ينادي فيها منادي الارتحال والزوال، فتقبض الأرواح وتفنى الأجساد وتستودع في التراب وتأكلها الديدان إلا من رحمت. وغدا ينادي المنادي، فيجتمع أهل الشرق وأهل الغرب، مؤمنهم وكافرهم وتقيهم وفاجرهم وكبيرهم وصغيرهم، وأميرهم ومأمورهم وغنيهم وفقيرهم وظالمهم ومظلومهم، عندما تنادي لمن الملك اليوم؟ لله الواحد القهار. يا واحد يا قهار ارحمنا في ذلك اليوم رحمة تكرمنا بها بكمال الصدق معك، وارحمنا في هذه الليلة رحمة نثبت بها على الوفاء بحق العهد، حتى إذا حشرت الخلائق وأوقفت أحدنا بين يديك ساعة العرض عليك وناديته بمناد بأمر منك، ليقم فلان ابن فلانة للعرض على الله، ووقف وحيدا فريدا بين يديك، وقد تخلف عنه ماله وجاهه وقوته ومنصبه، ولم يبق له إلا جودك ورحمتك، فما أنت فاعل بنا في تلك الساعة؟ نسألك صلاحا لأحوالنا في هذه الساعة، ويدوم معنا ويبقى، ونرتقي في مراقيه حتى نكرم في تلك الساعة. اللهم وإنا نسألك فرجا لأهل الإيمان في كل مكان، تفرج بها عن المكروبين وعن المظلومين وعن المضطهدين. إلهنا وسيدنا، كم من دماء تهراق في كل يوم وليلة بغير وجه حق، وكم من معان تطمس في القلوب وأصحابها غفل لا يدرون. نسألك نظرة تغفر بها للمذنب، وتصلح بها المفسد والفاسد، وتقوم بها المعوج، وتتوب بها على العاصي، وتقبل بها على المعرض. ارحم المستضعفين والمظلومين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، وارتضينا يا مولانا لانتهاضة في خدمتك وخدمة دينك تنبسط بها بسط الهداية والنور في هذه البلاد وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، حتى يسعد أهلها بأنوار الإقبال عليك والصدق معك، سعادة نكرم بها وإياهم بدوام رضوانك يا أكرم الأكرمين. واجعل آخر كلامنا من الدنيا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم، بحقائقها متحققين حسا ومعنى، وقد أفنينا الأعمار في خدمتها وتنوير قلوب البشر بها يا أكرم الأكرمين. ارتضينا لخدمة دينك. إنك تعطي الدنيا من تحب ومن لا تحب، لكنك لا تعطي الدين إلا من تحب، فأعطنا الدين يا رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. واجز عنا إخواننا القائمين على هذا الأمر خير الجزاء. لا تجعل في هذا المجلس شقيا إلا ولا
ولا محروما. لا تجعل ذي حاجة لا تدع ذا حاجة لا قضيت حاجته. واجزي عنا أخانا الشيخ حمزة خير الجزاء، وأيده فيما هو فيه في ظاهر الأمر وخافيه، وألهمه من المراشد والمراضي ما يرقى به فوق ما قد أعطيته، فتحا وعلما ومعرفة وهمة وخدمة لدينك. واجمع القلوب عليه ليجمعها عليك، وإخواننا القائمين الأخ خليل والقائمين على هذا الترتيب، اللهم أكرمنا وإياهم بكرامة من عندك نكون بها من أهل مودتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، والحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.